Erev Tov, everyone. Erev Tov. It is Monday night. It is 8 p.m. here on the east side of the United States, here in the diaspora. This is the Maimon Beit Knesset, therefore it must be Zeyde Story Corner. That's right. It is Zeyde Story Corner. Good to see you all here tonight. Let's see who we have in the chat room. We have Regina. Well, hi, Regina. And we have Donald and Veronica. And we have a few people watching in the background. And as usual, and more to come. Okay, so we are quickly closing in on the book by Isaac Bashevis Singer on his children's sites. Fantastic stories. Yeah, they have been. They have been absolutely wonderful stories. We will be starting, once we finish this, we'll be starting a new book, which is primarily stories from the Sephardic world. So it should be interesting. Yes, should be very interesting. And that one is actually even a bigger book than this one was. So we have plenty of stories coming up for everybody. And so I'll be here. Yes, you will be here. Yep, right up until we go on our summer break, and then right back again after the High Holy Days. So anyway, so Marilyn has joined us, and again, more to come. Yeah, more to come. Okay, so we should probably get on with the stories. Yes, we should. Okay, so let me get you onto your camera, if you don't mind. Well, I don't mind at all. Okay, I am on my camera now, and I see Marshall has come into the room. Okay, good to see you, Marsh. Okay, so this first story is about dogs and cats, and it is called The Cat Who Thought She Was a Dog, and the Dog Who Thought He Was a Cat. Can you imagine such a thing? Okay, so here we go. Once there was a poor peasant. Imagine that. There was a poor peasant. Can you imagine that? Yeah, I get it. Okay. Anyway, so once upon a time, there was a poor peasant. Jan Skiba, his name. He lived with his wife and 3 daughters in a one-room hut with a straw roof, far from the village. The house had a bed, a bench bed, and a stove, but no mirror. A mirror was a luxury for a poor peasant. And why would a peasant need a mirror? Peasants aren't curious about their appearance. But this peasant did have a dog and a cat inside his hut. The dog's name was Burek, and the cat, Kot. They had both been born within the same week. As little food as the peasant had for himself and his family, he still wouldn't let his dog and cat go hungry. Well, that's very nice of him. Yes, it actually is. Since the dog had never seen another dog, and the cat had never seen another cat, and they saw only each other, the dog thought he was a cat, and the cat thought she was a dog. True, they were far from being alike by nature. The dog barked and the cat meowed. The dog chased rabbits and the cat lurked for mice. But must all creatures be exactly like their own kind? A peasant's children weren't exactly alike either. Burek and Kot lived a good terms, often ate from the same dish, and tried to mimic each other. When Burek barked, Kot tried to bark along, and when Kot meowed, Burek tried to meow too. Kot occasionally chased rabbits, and Burek made an effort to catch a mouse. The peddlers who brought goats, chickens, eggs, honey, calves, and whatever was available from the peasants in the village never came to Jan Skiba's poor huts. They knew that Jan was so poor he had nothing to sell. But one day a peddler happened to stray there. When he came inside, he began to lay out his wares. Jan Skiba's wife and daughters were bedazzled by all the pretty doodads. From his sack, the peddler drew yellow beads, false pearls, tin earrings, rings, brooches, colorful handkerchiefs, garters, and other such trinkets. But what enthralled the woman of the house the most was a mirror set in a wooden frame. They asked the peddler its price, and he said half a gulden, which was a lot of money for a poor peasant. After a while, Janskiba's wife, Miriana, made a proposition to the peddler. She would pay him 5 groschen a month for the mirror. The peddler hesitated for a moment. The mirror took up too much space in his sack, and there was always the danger that it might break. So he therefore decided to go along, took the first payment of 5 groschen from Miriana, and left the mirror with the family. He visited the region often, and he knew the Skibas to be honest people. He would gradually get his money back and a profit besides. The mirror created a commotion in the hut. Until then, Miriana and the children had seldom seen themselves. Before they had the mirror, they had only seen their reflections in the barrel of water that stood by the door. Now, they could see themselves clearly, and they began to find defects in their faces, defects they had never noticed before. Miriana was pretty, but she had a tooth missing in front, and she felt that this made her ugly. One daughter discovered that her nose was too stub and too broad. The second, that her chin was too narrow and too long. The third, that her face was sprinkled with freckles. Janskiba, too, caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror and grew displeased by his thick lips and his teeth, which protruded like a box. That day, the women of the house became so absorbed in the mirror they didn't cook dinner, didn't make the bed, and neglected all the other household tasks. Miriana had heard of a dentist in the big city who could replace a missing tooth. But such things were expensive. The girls tried to console each other with that they were pretty enough and that they would find suitors, but they no longer felt as jolly as before. They had been afflicted with the vanity of city girls. The one with the broad nose kept trying to pinch it together with her fingers to make it narrower. The one with the too long chin pushed it up with her fist to make it shorter. The one with the freckles wondered if there was a salve in the city that could remove freckles. But where would the money come from for the fare to the city? And what about the money to buy this salve? For the first time, the Skiba family felt deeply its poverty and envied the rich. But the human members of the household were not the only ones affected. The dog and the cat also grew disturbed by the mirror. The hut was low, and the mirror had been hung just above a bench. The first time the cat sprang up on the bench and saw her image in the mirror, she became terribly perplexed. She had never before seen such a creature. Cat's whiskers bristled. She began to meow at her reflection and raised a paw to it. But the other creature meowed back and raised her paw too. Soon the dog jumped up on the bench, and when he saw the other dog, he became wild with rage and shock. He barked at the other dog and showed his teeth, but the other barked back and bared his fangs too. So great was the distress of Burek and Kat that for the first time in their lives they turned on each other. Burek took a bite out of Kat's throat, and Kat hissed and spat at him and clawed his muzzle. They both started to bleed, and the sight of blood aroused them so that they nearly killed or crippled each other. The members of the household barely managed to separate them because a dog is stronger than a cat. Burek had to be tied outside, and he howled all day and all night. In their anguish, both the dog and the cat stopped eating. When Jan Skeba saw the disruption the mirror had created in his household, he decided a mirror wasn't what his family needed. "Why look at yourself," he said, "when you can see and admire the sky, the sun, the moon, the stars, and the earth, with all its forests, meadows, rivers, and plants?" He took the mirror down from the wall and put it away in the woodshed. When the peddler came back for his monthly installment, Janskiba gave him back the mirror and in its stead bought kerchiefs and slippers for the women. After the mirror disappeared, Burek and Kot returned to normal. Again, Borek thought he was a cat, and Kot was sure she was a dog. Despite all defects that the girls had found in themselves, they made pretty good marriages. The village rabbi heard what had happened to Jenskipa's house, and he said, "A glass mirror shows only skin of the body. The real image of a person is his willingness to help himself and his family, and, as far as possible, all those he comes in contact with. This kind of mirror reveals the very soul of a person." And there you have it. That is the story of Burek and Kot. Okay. This next story is called Menashe's Dream. Menashe was an orphan. He lived with his uncle Mendel, who was a poor glazier and couldn't even manage to feed and clothe his own children. Menashe had already completed his cheder studies, and after the fall holiday was to be apprenticed to a bookbinder. Menashe had always been a curious child. He had begun to ask questions as soon as he could talk. How high is the sky? How deep is the earth? What is beyond the edge of the world? Why are people born? Why do they die? Anyway, it was a hot and humid summer day. A golden haze hovered over the village. The sun was as small as the moon and yellow as brass. Dogs loped along with their tails between their legs. Pigeons rested in the middle of the marketplace. Goats sheltered themselves beneath the eaves of the huts, chewing their cuds and shaking their beards. Menashe quarreled with his aunt the Shova and left the house without eating lunch. He was about 12, with a longish face, black eyes, sunken cheeks. He wore a torn jacket and was barefoot. His only possession was a tattered storybook, which he had read scores of times. It was called Alone in the Wild Forest. The village in which he lived stood in a forest that surrounded it like a sash and was said to stretch as far as Lublin. It was blueberry time, and here and there one might also find wild strawberries. I love strawberries. Yeah, I know you do. Menashe made his way through pastures and wheat fields. He was hungry, and he tore off a stalk of wheat to chew on the grain. In the meadow, cows were lying down, too hot even to whisk off the flies with their tails. Two horses stood, the head of one near the rump of the other, lost in their horse thoughts, whatever that is. In a field planted in buckwheat, the boy was amazed to see a crow perched on the torn hat of a scarecrow. Once Menashe entered the forest, it was cooler. The pine trees stood straight as pillars, and on their brownish bark hung golden necklaces, the light of the sun shining through the pine needles. The sound of the cuckoo and the woodpecker were heard, and an unseen bird kept repeating the same eerie screech. Menashe stepped carefully over moss pillows. He crossed a shallow streamlet with purely joyfully over the pebbles and stones. The forest was still and yet full of voices and echoes. He wandered deeper and deeper into the forest. As a rule, he left some stone markers behind, but not today. He was lonely, his head ached, his knees felt weak. Am I getting sick, he thought? Maybe I'm going to die, when I will soon be with Daddy and Mama. When he came to a blueberry patch, he sat down, picked one berry after another, and popped them into his mouth, but they did not satisfy his hunger. Flowers with intoxicating odors grew among the blueberries. Without realizing it, Menashe stretched full length on the forest floor. He fell asleep, but in his dream he continued walking. The trees became even taller, the smell stronger. Huge birds flew from branch to branch. The sun was setting. The forest grew thinner, and he soon came out on a plain with a broad view of the evening sky. Suddenly, a castle appeared in the twilight. Menashe had never seen such a beautiful structure. Its roof was of silver, and from it rose crystal towers. Its many tall windows were as high as the building itself. Menashe went up to one of the windows and looked in. On the wall opposite him, he saw his own portrait hanging. He was dressed in luxurious clothes, such as he had never owned. The huge room was empty. Why is the castle empty, he wondered, and why is my portrait hanging on the wall? The boy in the picture seemed to be alive and waiting impatiently for someone to come. Then doors opened, where there had not been one before, and men and women came into the room. They were dressed in white satin, and the women wore jewels and held holiday prayer books with gold embossed covers. Menashe gazed in astonishment. He recognized his father, his mother, his grandfathers and grandmothers, and other relatives. He wanted to rush over to them, hug and kiss them, but the window glass stood in his way. He began to cry. His paternal grandfather, Tobias, the scribe, separated himself from the group and came to the window. The old man's beard was as white as his long coat. He looked both ancient and young. "Why are you crying?" he asked. Despite the glass that separated them, Menashe heard him clearly. "Are you my grandfather Tobias?" "Yes, my child, I am your grandfather." "Who does this castle belong to?" "To all of us." "To me too?" "Of course, to the whole family." "Grandpa, let me in," Menashe called. "I want to speak to my father and mother." His grandfather looked at him lovingly and said, "One day you will live with us here, but the time has not yet come." "How long do I have to wait?" "That is a secret. It will not be for many, many years." "Grandpa, I don't want to wait so long. I'm hungry and thirsty and tired. Please let me in. I miss my father and mother and you and Grandma. I don't want to be an orphan." "My dear child, we know everything. We think about you and we love you. We are all waiting for the time when we will all be together. But you must be patient. You have a long journey to take before you come here to stay. Please, just let me in for a few minutes." Grandfather Tobias left the window and took counsel with the other members of the family. When he returned, he said, "You may come in, but only for a little while. We will show you around the castle and let you see some of our treasures, but then you must leave." The door opened, and Menashe stepped inside. He was no sooner over the threshold than his hunger and weariness left him. He embraced his parents. They kissed and hugged him, but they didn't utter a word. He felt strangely light. He floated along, and his family floated with him. His grandfather opened door after door, and each time Menashe's astonishment grew. One room was filled with racks of boys' clothing, pajamas, jackets, shirts, coats. Menashe realized that these were the clothes he had worn as far back as he could remember. He also recognized his shoes, socks, caps, and nightshirts. The second door opened, and he saw all the toys he had ever owned. The tin soldiers his father had bought him, the jumping clown his mother had brought back from the fair in Lublin, the whistles and harmonicas, the teddy bear grandfather had given him one Purim, and the wooden horse that was a gift of grandmother Spritze on his 6th birthday, the notebook in which he had practiced writing, his pencils, his Bible lay on the table. The Bible was open at the title page with its familiar engraving of Moshe holding the holy tablets and Aharon in his priestly robes, both framed by a border of 6 winged angels. He noticed his name in the space allowed for it. Menashe could hardly overcome his wonder when the third door opened. This room was filled with soap bubbles. They did not burst as soap bubbles do, but floated serenely about, reflecting all the colors of the rainbow. Some of them mirrored castle gardens, rivers, windmills, and many other sights. Menashe knew that these were the bubbles he used to blow from his favorite bubble pipe. Now they seemed to have a life of their own. And here we are going to take our break. So, we will be back in 6 minutes. And when we come back, we'll find out what happens to Menashe. So everybody, please stay tuned. We'll be back in 6.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
It's intermission time, folks, so hurry, hurry, hurry. Step right over to our refreshment center for the most extravagant array of refreshment goodies ever assembled under one roof. Enjoy breathtaking, mouth-watering goodies, everything from a snack to a delicious full meal. At our refreshment center, you'll find a large variety of goodies to satisfy your hunger, your thirst, or your sweet tooth. So hurry, hurry, hurry. Visit our refreshment center now. The show starts in 5 minutes. The show starts in 4 minutes. The show starts in 3 minutes. The show starts in 2 minutes. The show starts in 1 minute. And now, on with the show.
And we are back, just as we said we would be. Okay, so let's find out what happened to Menashe. Shall we? Okay. Let's see, we're at the bubbles, right? Yeah, okay. The fourth door opened, and Menashe entered a room with no one in it. Yet it was full of sounds of happy talk, songs, and laughter. Menashe heard his own voice and the songs he used to sing when he lived at home with his parents. He also heard the voices of his former playmates, some of whom he had long since forgotten. The fifth door led to a large hall. It was filled with the characters in the stories his parents had told him at bedtime, and with the heroes and heroines of Alone in the Wild Forest. They were all there. David the warrior and the Ethiopian princess whom David saved from captivity, the highwayman Bendurek, who robbed the rich and fed the poor, Velakan the giant, who had one eye in the center of his forehead and who carried a fir tree as a staff in his right hand and a snake in his left, the midget Pitzelis, whose beard dragged on the ground, and who was the jester to the fearsome king Merodach, and the two-headed wizard Melchizedek, who by witchcraft spirited innocent girls into the desert of Sodom and Gomorrah. Menashe hardly had time to take all them in when the sixth door opened. Here, everything was changing constantly. The walls of the room turned like a carousel. Events flashed by. A golden horse became a blue butterfly. A rose as bright as the sun became a goblet out of which flew fiery grasshoppers, purple thorns, and silver bats. On a glittering throne with 7 steps leading up to it sat King Solomon, who somehow resembled Manasseh. He wore a crown, and at his feet knelt the Queen of Sheba. A peacock spread his tail and addressed King Solomon in Hebrew. The priestly Leviim played their lyres. Giants waved their swords in the air, and Ethiopian slaves riding lions served goblets of wine and trays filled with pomegranates. For a moment, Manasseh did not understand what it all meant. Then he realized that he was seeing his dreams. Behind the 7th door, Manasseh glimpsed men and women, animals, and many things that were completely strange to him. The images were not as vivid as they had been in the other rooms. The figures were transparent and surrounded by mist. On the threshold stood a girl, Manasseh's own age. She had long golden braids. Although Manasseh could not see her clearly, he liked her at once. For the first time, he turned to his grandfather. "What is all this?" he asked. And his grandfather replied, "These are the people and the events of your future." "Where am I?" Manasseh asked. "You are in a castle that has many names. We like to call it the place where nothing is lost. There are many more wonders here, but now it is time for you to leave." Manasseh wanted to remain in this strange place forever, together with his parents and his grandparents. He looked questioningly at his grandfather, who shook his head. Manasseh's parents seemed to want him both to remain and to leave as quickly as possible. They still did not speak, but signaled to him, and Manasseh understood that he was in grave danger. This must be a forbidden place. His parents silently bade him farewell, and his face became wet and hot from their kisses. At that moment, everything disappeared. The castle, his parents, his grandparents, the girl, everything. Manasseh shivered and awoke. It was night in the forest. Dew was falling. High above the crows of the pine tree, and the full moon shone and the stars twinkled. Manasseh looked into the face of a girl who was bending over him. She was barefoot and wore a patched skirt. Her long, braided hair shone golden in the moonlight. She was shaking him, saying, "Get up, get up. It is late. You can't remain here in the forest." Manasseh sat up. "Who are you?" "I was looking for berries, and I found you here. I've been trying to wake you." "What is your name?" "Hanaleh. We moved into the village last week." She looked familiar, but he could not remember meeting her before. Suddenly he knew. She was the girl he had seen in the 7th room, before he woke up. You lay there like dead. I was frightened when I saw you. Were you dreaming? Your face was so pale and your lips were moving. Yes, I did have a dream. What about? A castle. What kind of castle? Menashe did not reply, and the girl did not repeat her question. She stretched out her hand to him and helped him get up. Together they started toward home. The moon had never seemed so light or the stars so close. They walked with their shadows behind them. Myriads of crickets chirped, frogs croaked with human voices. Menashe knew his uncle would be angry at him for coming home late. His aunt would scold him for leaving without his lunch. But these things no longer mattered. In his dream, he had visited a mysterious world. He had found a friend, Hanale, and he had already decided to go berry picking the next day. Among the undergrowth, the wild mushrooms, little people in the red jackets, gold caps, and green boots emerged. They danced in a circle and sang songs which is heard only by those who know that everything lives and nothing in time is ever lost. What a lovely story. Yeah, it is a very lovely story. Okay. So, we have time for another? I think we have time for one more. We'll see. Maybe it'll be a cliffhanger. We'll see. Okay. This story is called Tashlik. Aharon the watchmaker did not live on our street. But when I climbed to the highest branch of the lime tree that grew in our garden, I could see his house clearly. It was the only one in the village that had a small lawn in front of it. The shutters of Aharon's house were painted green. Flower pots stood in the windows where there were sunflowers in the garden. Aharon and his family lived on the ground floor. That is, with the exception of his daughter Feigele. She had a room in the attic. At night, a lamp burned in Feigele's window long after the lights downstairs had been extinguished. Occasionally, I caught a glimpse of her shadow passing across the curtain. Motel, Feigele's brother, had built a dovecote on the roof and often stood on the top of the building chasing pigeons with a long stick. Leon, the older boy, who was studying at the Polytechnic in Krakow, rode around the village on a horse when he came home on vacation. There was nothing that the emancipated family did not possess. They had a parrot, canaries, a dog. Aharon played the zither. His wife owned a piano. She came from Lublin and didn't wear a wig, or a shadel, as we say. Yeah, that's true. Aharon, the watchmaker who was a witchmaker. Where did I get that word from? Okay, anyway, let's go back. Aharon, the watchmaker, who was also both goldsmith and jeweler, was the only man in the village with a telephone in his house. He could speak directly to the mosque. I was not a native of the hamlet. I had been brought up in Warsaw, but when the war came, my parents left the city and went to live with my grandfather, the rabbi. There we were stuck in the village, which was on no railroad and was surrounded by pine forest. My father was appointed assistant rabbi. I never stopped longing for Warsaw, its streets, its trolley cars, its illuminated show windows, and its tall balconied residences. Aharon the watchmaker and his family represented for me a fragment of the metropolis, Aharon, and a library containing books written in several languages. In his store, one could put on earphones and listen to the radio. He subscribed to 2 Warsaw papers, one in Polish and one in Yiddish, and was always hunting for a chess partner. Weigele had attended the gymnasium in Lublin, boarding with an aunt while she was away from home. But now, having received her diploma, she had returned to her parents. Aharon the watchmaker had been a student of my grandfather's and had been considered a religious prodigy until he had been caught reading the Bible in German translation, a sure sign of heresy. Oh my goodness, in German. Like Moshe Mendelssohn, Aharon was a hunchback. Although he had not been officially excommunicated, it was almost as if he had been. He had a high forehead, a mangy-looking goatee, and large black eyes. There was something ancient and half-forgotten in his gaze, for which I knew no name, and which made me think of Spinoza and Real Acosta. Still got a few minutes. When he sat at the window of his store studying some mechanism through a watch glass, he seemed to be reading the wheels as a fortune teller does his crystal. All day his sad smile enunciated over and over again, "Vanity of vanities." Weigele had inherited her father's eyes. She kept to herself, was always to be seen strolling alone, a tall, thin girl with a long, pale face and a thin nose and lips. She always carried 2 books under her arm, one thick one and one thin. A strange gentleness emanated from her. By this time, the fashionable girls cut their hair en garçon, but Weigele wore hers in a bun. She always took the road to the Russian cemetery. Once I saw her reading the inscriptions on the gravestone. I was too shy to talk to her. Wasn't even sure she knew who I was, since she had a way of looking over people's heads. But I knew that, like me, she was living in exile. She didn't seem to ever stop meditating, would pause to examine trees, and would reflectively stare down well shafts. I kept trying to meet her, but I couldn't think of a plan. Moreover, I was ashamed of my appearance, decked out as I was in a velvet cap, a long gabardine, and red earlocks. And that, my friend, is where we are going to stop for tonight. We finish this story next week. I hope you will return to be with us. Thank you for being here, and don't forget that the Rabbis Discuss will not be on this week because Rabbi Anshel is still out of the country. He will be back in a couple of weeks, and then we will pick up with the show. On Wednesday night, of course, is the Torah study in depth with Rabbi A. And Friday night is Kabbalat and Ma'ariv LeShabbat. And Shabbat morning at 10 a.m. Eastern is Shachrit and Musaf. And then right back here on Monday to find out what in the world is going to happen to this boy. Until then, everybody, we will simply say, Laila Tov.